Welcome to the Dev Launch Podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of the tech industry's rising stars. We have a very special guest today, one who's going against the grain. Dave Goerlich is the co-founder and CEO of the Refinery, and in his dev shop, they're refining their offer and positioning to effectively execute value pricing. Listen in as we hear him talk about their approach to hiring T-shaped people and what they're doing to safeguard against scope creep when they pitch fixed bids to their clients. Dave, you are quite a veteran in this space, and this was even before launching the Refinery. You had quite a wealth of experience. You had some pretty amazing and technical roles back in corporate America, and I don't know. I'd venture a guess that you were pretty well compensated back in corporate America, right?
Reasonably so, yeah.
So, as I think about it, it sounds like pay and career success probably wasn't the catalyst to starting the Refinery for you. So what was the tipping point for you that led to your eventual launch of this agency?
Well, it was really a factor of kind of two things. It was, I wanted if you want to think of it that way, the control of what kind of work I was doing. And also, the majority of my career had been in client services. And I wanted to be in that situation where I was able to be the one choosing those clients, I guess still the control kind of thing, to do the quality of work and the type of work that I found important. So it really was a decision not about financials, because the reality is that I took a pretty good financial pay cut going from a corporate job to now it's all me. But it really was about the opportunity to do good quality work the way I wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I'm being honest, that sentiment that you just expressed, as I have more conversations with dev agency owners, that's a pretty consistent theme. It's I could be making more money back in corporate America, but I want to be able to build something that I can be proud of. And I can do it in a way that I know is the right way to build this app versus, when the powers that be dictate, these are the requirements, this is the timeline it needs to be done by, you don't necessarily have that flexibility. So there's a lot of craftsmanship, it sounds like, that kind of goes into that decision.
Very, very much so. It's, I can't remember who it was I just saw recently made the comment about it's about doing good work, not just about doing work in which you're trading some of your time for someone else's dollars.
Yeah, that's good. That's really, really good. Okay. So you were the engineering brain. So when you guys first started the Refinery, you were the engineering brain behind it. And then the partner that you had with you, he was the design guy is what I was understanding. So I imagine that combination of engineering and design was a really powerful combination for your agency early on. Why, I guess my question would be why was partnering up with him the right move for you when you first started?
It was a really good idea for us to work together because we had both experienced design and I mean that from the overarching, the user experience aspect, not just the aesthetic. That being something that was bolted on after the fact. We build all of this software and then we'd hand it over and somebody could try to maybe make the screens a little nicer. And it just seemed like such a antithesis to how good software should be written, where when you do that, where the engineers work first, you wind up with software that really looks like the database schema. Well, we've got a page, we've got a form for this entity, and we've got a form for this entity, and we've got a form for this entity. And then we do this one action. We have to pick a couple of entities, and we click a button, and that's the join table. And everything looks like the database. Where working from the very beginning, even before we really even wrote the first line of code, and having a design-first thought process, we would ask questions like, forget what the data needs to look like. What is the business process you're trying to automate? What is it you're doing? And we would ask those questions and we would build the software truly around the process and then let the computer sort out how the database needed to look. Um, so that was really the catalyst for us, and what truly set us apart from a lot of other agencies where, yeah, they might have a designer, they might not have any designer at all. It was just, oh, we've got some guys who know how to build software. And a lot of that, I think everybody's used that piece of software where it's like, yeah, I can tell you exactly what the database looks like because each of the screens are just reflecting, CRUD in and out from that.
Right,
So,
right. That's super interesting. Yeah, so it wasn't just like design in the sense of like let's make this thing look pretty. It was like design from a user interface, a user
mhm.
experience perspective. And like you said, like you had that from the very beginning. So
Yep.
as you were building out applications or custom software, it was like built into your initial process. It wasn't kind of an afterthought.
Right. Yeah,
Interesting.
it was truly part of this company's DNA from its founding was that design is a first class citizen amongst the company.
Hmm. Interesting. And so when you were first starting out, I guess like was there a certain clientele where having that unique value proposition, like an integrated approach of engineering plus design, was there a unique like audience that you were able to reach or a type of client that needed that?
I would love to say yes, but the reality is that like most organizations that start out in the beginning, you are looking for the company who is willing to cut you a check to build them some software.
Yeah.
Um, Now, we did focus on organizations that we felt we could make an impact, that it wasn't just a little thing on the side. We wanted to be impactful to their business.
Mhm.
We wanted to work with good people. So we were selective in the types of clients we worked with. Um, Through the years, we've had clients that we fired because I'm sorry if you're a toxic individual, I'm not going to expose my team to you.
Hmm.
So we've had those kind of things, but we had never really taken the design first methodology and made it a hard push that was a competitive advantage.
Hmm.
We were just good at what we did, corporately speaking, even when it was just my partner and I. We were good at what we did. And I think it by nature, not by intent. Because when
Hmm.
we would come in, we'd have a conversation. We were asking, tell us about your business process. What are you trying to solve? We were always kind of around that side of things versus, well, what screens do you want? Yeah, here's what we can build for you.
Mhm. You weren't order takers from the very beginning. You were always a thought partner in the
Yes.
development of your applications. That's really cool. And like, and sorry, you go. You were going to say
Oh
something.
yeah, I was going to actually echo that. With we had a client that was very early on that we built. He was an importer. We built an inventory forecasting and order management platform for him. Something he had been attempting to manage in a series of Excel spreadsheets and was spending 20, 30 hours a week trying to figure out the math of, each
Wow.
week, trying to figure out what he needed to have ordered. We built a system that automated that for him, did all of the math behind the scenes.
Hmm.
But through that, since that was such a core part of his business, and we worked together so well, we developed a partnership with him that he was comfortable calling me to talk about. Well, the question was eventually, what numbers do we think we should put into the software? It was a conversation about how he should address his suppliers and should we talk to his customers and strategically, how should we solve this problem that was a business problem?
Hmm.
But he felt he could call us because we understood his business so well
Mhm.
that it was a partnership where he had us as a sounding board because we worked so deeply into let's solve the problem, not just build you some software.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Where would you say you gathered that experience to like bring that type of approach to the table? Did you just kind of discover it on the job, or was it from your corporate life?
Um, a little bit of both. I've always been one myself that I want to understand around what I'm building. Like, why are we building this? And with that, it kind of, because the majority of, while I did have some time as a corporate internal development resource, a lot of my history personally in my career has been in a client services agency type of situation. So I've always been the consultant that's come in that's had to pick up around everything. And I've become very comfortable asking all of the dumb questions.
Right.
You keep saying that word, and contextually, I think what you've done is you have an acronym that you now pronounce as a word, and it makes no sense to me. What does that mean? And being that guy in the meeting to draw those questions out. So with that, I have developed that ability to just ask those questions around, hey, what is the process you're trying to achieve here? Help me understand the bigger picture so I can help guide and build the best software. So it's kind of evolved over time, I guess, to answer your question, is just being in those situations where I don't want to just be an order taker. I want to understand what's going on and being willing to ask a bunch of dumb questions.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I'm sure like the asking the dumb questions, I'm sure you got a lot of practice doing that in a corporate setting. And then you kind of were able to evolve that to the unique needs at the refinery as you went.
Very much so. My team almost kind of relies on me to be the one who asks the dumb questions. We had a client a number of years ago that I had a junior level developer in probably his first 6 months of doing software development at all, sitting in a meeting with me with a client, and heard me ask the same question 3 different ways. The first 2 times was, oh no, that condition can never happen. And the third time I asked it, they're like, well, there is this one kind of situation where that actually does happen. And afterwards, he came to me and said, how did you know to keep asking? And I said, honestly, anytime somebody tells you that it's a hard no, that can never happen, there's an exception to that rule. And it's those kind of things where you're just willing to ask the dumb question, like, hey, I don't understand your business process, and not have an ego to feel like you have to know everything, because you're not going to know everything.
Wow. That right there, that's a very profound statement. And I think it's necessary. And I would say even beyond just engineering, like we need to have that type of approach in any type of advisory position where we're asking, like you said, the dumb questions, but we also have the emotional intelligence not to let our ego get in the way, but just really come as somewhat of a blank slate and just be available in the context of that conversation. That's really profound. I love that takeaway. So I want to dive a little deeper into the interplay between design and development. So what goes into, like, as you think through capacity planning for your dev shop, and you think about like hiring for software developers versus hiring UI UX designers, what goes into that capacity plan as you think about it into the future?
So two core components of that I have learned over the years. The first, when I describe it, normally brings a smile to everybody who's been in the meeting, which is a designer can keep a couple of software developers busy for a week with 4 strokes of a Sharpie. And it's really true. To understand that design in a small amount of time can create a significant backlog of development effort. For example, and this is where the AI comes in. Like, okay, that's 4 years worth of work. But having that understanding, then you look at how do I structure a team to understand that I'm not going to have a designer and a developer paired on a week-to-week basis on project A, because the designer is going to do a bunch of work up front. There is a decent amount of design up front that happens just to get the whole lay of the land. But then the designer's efforts really fall off and is just there to handle hey, this little thing surfaced, how should we handle it? type of things. So having a single designer or a couple of designers across a bigger team of developers is normally how we have structured the company.
Hmm.
Likewise, developers like to be on a single project and be able to be heads down, get in the zone, and crank out complete development cards, right? That's our nature as engineers. We want to be in the moment. We want to stay in that context.
Right.
Designers, on the other hand, prefer to have a couple of different things going on. They like to be on multiple projects at once because of the type of creativity that they're working in. There are times when they need to set something aside and let their subconscious noodle on it while they jump over onto another project. And then you get some cross cultural, if you will. Oh, hey, I just had this idea on this. This actually would work over here. So the designers on my team, both from a capacity point of view, but also from a workflow and a productivity point of view, prefer to have multiple projects that they are actively involved with.
Hmm.
So doing that then made sense to have a smaller number of designers relative to the development team.
Hmm.
But you're always kind of playing a capacity game. And for us, what I found is I just build the team in such a way that I always have extra design capacity.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's a significant amount. If we wind up on a longer term project, there's a lot of development. And with that, we've actually engaged with other clients and actually other agencies to subcontract just design work.
Oh, interesting.
It works for a nice filler, and for my design team, it's yet another thing that they can sink their teeth into and have some really great experience with that makes them a better designer.
Yeah. And I remember one of the things you had told me about before when we were just on a kind of a get to know you call is you had said that there's like there's kind of like that cross pollination that happens between projects where I imagine software developers get a little bit of that cross pollination, but it's like at a different pace almost, right? Because like for UI UX or some type of design, there's more like real time creativity that's needed. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
for software development, there's like we just need to get through this one project first before we can kind of layer on that experience onto our next project.
Yeah, it's because of the commonality in building software from an engineering point of view. What you find is those commonalities emerge as you look back over the bigger picture and you go, oh, hey, I built something similar to this 2 clients ago
Mm-hmm.
because you've got a similar technological feel or a similar small part of a business process. Or, oh gosh, we used this headless CMS on a project before. Let me go grab some of the code around how I interface with their GraphQL interface.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Totally different business application, but I'm still using a similar component underneath.
Mm-hmm.
Where on the design side, as you're working actively, um, some of it is current design thought process. Because if you think about how like web apps looked 5 years ago, we have new things that are now the cool look.
Mm-hmm.
And not just from the aesthetic point of view, but just the flow of things and what
Mm-hmm.
people's mental models are, because you
Right.
want to stay within their mental models. So you have a lot more real time, like you said, cross pollination of ideas on how do I implement this from a design level.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is I know you say, typically you want to have like one to many when it comes to the
Mhm.
UX, UI designers with engineers. Have you found there's like a kind of a sweet spot ratio?
I can't say that there's a sweet spot. It really varies depending on the project workload.
Mm.
And it can be sometimes we've had times where we've had 2 designers working on a project because of the breadth of what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've had times where we've had one designer and two or three engineers building it out behind the scenes. Sometimes it's even one to one, where I've had an engineer, single engineer working on a project. We try not to do too much of that as far as siloing individuals on projects, but with our team's expertise, sometimes you have that one project that's really, oh, that's really a her kind of project, or that's a him kind of project,
Mm,
or what have you.
sure, sure. And I guess maybe like piggybacking off of that, because you had said like, hey, when we're in that spot where our ratio is such that we actually don't need that excess
Hmm.
capacity for UI UX designers. You like to sub out your designers to other maybe dev shops or other companies.
Hmm.
um, Obviously, as an engineer, kind of like one of the critical questions that has always asked is like, well, what languages are you most familiar with, or what types of projects are you most familiar with? When you're like working to sub out designers, what is like the equivalent of what language do you code in?
Um, Interestingly enough, there isn't too much of that. I mean, you'll get into some of the tooling questions like, oh, are you guys prefer Figma, or are you a Photoshop group, or how
Mm,
do you like to, what tooling do you like to use? But it's interesting because it's really a lot more of a consultative type of engagement when it is just the design, because they're coming in and asking those questions and learning that business process and laying that kind of wireframe out, even if it's just, hey, we're just going to sketch it out on a piece of paper, and we'll hand the literal wireframes off, um, to the rest of your team to do the implementation on, because there may be, and many times you'll have that where you'll come in and there's already a comprehensive design language in place and a style guide and everything for the app. So you don't have to worry about the aesthetics, because the aesthetics have already been decided. It's how do we lay out a workflow? It really is the UX side of it, and the consideration of how do we help the how do we meet the user where they are in their mental model and make the software part of their journey, as an asset to their journey, not something they have to do and they have to go through this laborious process because that's how the software works.
right, right. So, like with that, do you find that in the design space, are there, I guess, like unique industry specializations that emerge? Like I'm thinking to myself, healthcare. Like, does UI UX operate different in healthcare than it does in manufacturing or fintech?
There probably are some aspects to it that are, because you just simply have things like, for example, you mentioned in the med tech space, you always have to be conscious of things like HIPAA.
Hmm.
Um, so you have considerations around, this needs to go through these kind of steps to make sure that we're HIPAA compliant.
Hmm.
Um, Fintech, I'm sure, is the same kind of thought process. In manufacturing, uh, often you have an interface, especially if you're doing stuff on the plant floor, you have an interface that is a different, well, to begin with, it's a different mental model, it's a different uh, demographic of user,
Hmm.
and they're in a very different environment. They are working on a machine. So
Hmm.
their interaction is not going to be the precision of, let me drag the mouse and click the button. It's big buttons.
Hmm.
It's even color styles, um, and you want to stay away from, like, red is negative, green is positive. Well, of course, you've got red green color blindness consideration there,
Oh.
um, but you'll have indications of, and we've seen this a number of times, for especially for plant operation stuff, where no color is fine. Color is an indicator. So instead of thinking red versus green, it's gray versus some color.
Wow.
And you have those kind of things, and you design differently for those
Hmm.
places.
Hmm.
Um, Bigger buttons because you may be working on a touch screen with somebody wearing gloves, and there's all sorts of different aspects that kind of fall into that. So the answer to the question is, yeah, there are some thought processes that align in those niches that you really have can develop that expertise, and then that expertise brings value to your customer because they're not just hiring a designer, they're hiring a designer or a development team that has experience and knows how to build software that fits those mental models of their users.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Something I wouldn't even have even thought about, but as a UI UX designer, really considering, in a particular industry, you're going to have a demographic that might look very different than the traditional white collar.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's using a fintech product is probably going to be, a very highly sophisticated computer user, whereas somebody on manufacturing or construction, it's going to be just a very different need that they
Mm-hmm.
have in interacting with that tool. That's super interesting. And I wonder if that kind of maybe piggybacks nicely into our next question, which is talking about T-shaped people.
Yep.
Um, so could you tell me a little bit about how this concept of T-shaped people has played a role in your talent strategy at Refinery?
So we have always looked for T-shaped people. And of course, T-shaped people are people who have a broad but 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 shallow depth of exposure to things that radiate around the core depth of their expertise. So, for example, a designer who has an understanding of HTML and CSS is a better designer than someone who doesn't have that understanding because they'll make decisions with the context of, I know whether this is hard to implement or reasonably easy to implement. I want a custom drop down, right? Like it's been actually a joke around the refinery for quite a while of the complexities that you can come up with from a design point of view that are all but impossible to implement.
Hmm.
So having that appreciation or empathy for the people who have to work alongside you and understanding what it is they do brings a higher value and actually builds the team together. At the same time, having engineers who have a design appreciation helps with understanding that the designers are going to present something that doesn't mimic the database, and that's okay. And at the same time, as those little things emerge as we go through a project, having an engineer who's got a designed mental model, or at least an appreciation for it,
Mm-hmm.
allows them to stop and say, well, how should we approach this? Or to bring it to the designer to say, hey, I have this. Here's kind of the context of where it falls, and here's some ideas, which actually helps the designer move in the right direction. So having that appreciation about the things that work around you has been powerful. And with that, what we've found is that we actually have a number of designers who have chosen to either, since coming to the company, or even chose to come and join the refinery because they wanted to also become front end developers. So I have a number of designers who are also front end. They do the HTML, the CSS, JavaScript, which is a phenomenal asset because then it also helps with, as we talked before, about the resource planning. I have a designer and a front end developer on the project at the same time in one person.
That's super cool. And yeah, it's like you're not stacking your team filled with exclusively generalists where they have, somewhat deep and very, very wide expertise. It
Mm-hmm.
is still a shallow understanding of a lot of different concepts, but they do still go deep in their unique, area of
Where
practice.
the most importantly, it's where their passion is.
Yeah.
You can have a lot of working knowledge,
Hmm.
which is great, but if you're not passionate about it,
Hmm.
it it doesn't really. It changes from I love what I do to, well, it's Monday morning again.
Hmm. Hmm. And I mean, that changes the whole dynamic and the culture of the company, I'd imagine too.
Yes, very much so.
Hmm.
Um, I want people who love the kind of work they do and want to do the quality, good work to bring value to our clients. And if they're passionate about that, passionate about the type of things that they have the talent to do, that brings a higher value to the client because we're gonna build better software for them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So like in your experience, would you like recommend to other employers that like they should also adopt a T-shaped model for acquiring new people onto the team?
Absolutely, without question.
Hmm.
Um, it brings, like I say, it brings higher value to the client, and it honestly, internally, from a cultural point of view, if you can appreciate the persons who you're working with and what their expertise is, um, even if, and I've used this because my background, I'm very much on the engineering side. Design, and especially from an aesthetic point of view, is I watch my designers work, and it truly is indistinguishable from magic to me.
Hmm.
Um, but I can greatly appreciate that because I've got just enough of an exposure and understanding of what it takes to do that, that I have that empathy towards, oh, that is actually a lot of work, even though it looks like it takes you 30 seconds and it just comes out magical. Um, but having that appreciation builds the team together
Hmm.
because it's not an us versus them,
Yeah,
designers versus engineers.
that's so good.
It's us as a team trying to solve a problem.
That's so good. Yeah, and like as you're saying that, I think about just experiencing office politics. That I think a lot of times it stems from this issue of really being in our own silos, and
Mhm.
probably to your own experience, one of the best ways to break down those silos is when you have T-shaped people who know enough to know that like when we run into conflict or tension, it's not because they just have it in for me and they're just trying to make my life miserable. It's no, no, no. Like I understand enough about like why what they're bringing up is important. When they're saying we need to move this button around, it's not because it's like, yeah, let's just do a extra week of,
Mhm.
of work for no reason. There's a reason for it. So
Very much so. Very much so.
that's really good. So speaking to specializations, and I want to transition now to talking a little bit about niches, if you
Mhm.
will. So over the past 15 plus years of your agency, what have been some of the most impactful industry specializations that you've chosen?
Well, it's interesting because I can't say we've ever explicitly sat down and said, we're going to choose this.
Hmm.
And I would anticipate that a lot of agencies are in the same boat we are, which is we wound up with one really good contact. We did a great project and they introduced us to their friends.
Hmm.
Or they moved on to another company in whatever that industry is, and they brought us with it. Like, oh, hey, I have this group I worked with at my last company. Let's bring them into this company. So what you wind up doing is kind of by just natural occurrence, kind of fall into some areas.
Hmm.
A few years ago, we sat down and took a look at where our most successful client projects were, both from a being, we're in business and there's nothing wrong with making money in business. So where did we make our money? But also, we looked at two other components, which were where did we bring the highest value to our clients and where did we have the most fun building software?
Hmm.
We took all three of those into account when we said, where are we? Where do
Hmm.
we want to focus? And we realized that our focuses honestly look a lot like the Cleveland where we're based. The Cleveland market is our focus has been in manufacturing and industrial computing, as well as some med tech. Of
Hmm.
course, we have the Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals here, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of momentum in med tech in the Cleveland area. So we've done some med tech projects and we've done them on the manufacturing projects. So for us, those are where we've kind of settled into
Hmm.
and what the value it brings rather than, again, being the generalist like we talked about before is software development is a great skill, but the general how do I type the code is somewhat commoditized. Like it can be done by a lot of people in the world. The value we can bring and where we differentiate ourselves is the experience in the background where we can walk into a client, for example, a medtech client. We can walk in and we can ask questions and make recommendations around things like HIPAA compliance, where they don't have to explain to a generalist organization, okay, so this is HIPAA and these are the things we have to do. We come in with that experience and that knowledge. And we've had clients where we have raised concerns like, hey, you guys know that it's not in our what we're working on, but we see this other thing over here that you guys might be out of HIPAA compliance on.
Hmm.
Um, or from a manufacturing point of view, we had two very different clients as far as what they manufactured, in no way competitive of each other.
Hmm.
But it turns out that they had a common process idea where they take material off of a roll and process it, kind of in a linear process.
Hmm.
And they thought a lot in the same kind of ways, like linear feet per minute through their mills and all of that. And we were able to come into the second client with that expertise and that understanding of, okay, you probably think of linear feet per minute, and you consider when you're doing changeovers how many feet of scrap am I going to create during my changeover.
Hmm.
And just having that expertise allowed our initial meetings to kind of take a step ahead
Hmm.
and not have to talk about all of the basics. We can now talk about where do we really want to go, so you can dive faster into bringing
Yeah.
the client value.
Yeah, there's less of a learning curve when you've already been serving clients that are very, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, like one of the powers of the niche. And the next question we're going to be talking about is value pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason why I think it's so important to talk about the niche or the industry specialization whenever we have a conversation about value pricing is because I think the two they kind of go hand in hand. Even with the
Very
example
much so.
you were just giving about, like, I just worked with somebody who is in the manufacturing space who is literally tackling the same problems that you're facing. But I don't want to say too much of that. I want to ask you, and I want your take on this. But you and I actually connected over this topic.
Mm-hmm.
We were chatting back and forth on LinkedIn, and you mentioned about how you guys are in the process right now of kind of launching into value pricing. And honestly, Dave, I've got to commend you because I think in some ways you're going against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of conversations I'm having with other developers, there is a fixation, I think, on hourly, and I think largely to do with the fact that people want to stay agile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what are some of the ways that you're strategizing that will allow you to be able to price this based on this value pricing proposition without succumbing to the traps of the waterfall method of development?
So the thought process really is a movement from a conversation with the client about we're going to build software that does these things, a conversation about functionality, to a conversation about, Mr. Client, what problem are you looking to solve? Most clients, and I'm just going to say this in general, that look to an outside agency for software development, do so because they don't have an internal development team. And much like I look to my attorney and to my CPA because they are my subject matter experts and I do not have the depth of expertise in their areas, I look to them to recommend a path to solve either a legal situation or how do I do my taxes. Um, our clients really, even though sometimes they don't realize they are looking to us for expertise on how do we bring technology, how do we bring software to bear to solve this business problem.
Hmm.
Um, Nobody really wants software
Hmm.
at the end of the day. It's the tool that they want to solve the business challenge or to
Hmm.
take advantage of the business opportunity.
Hmm.
So it's as you and I talked a little bit before on, it's the conversation that we have with a client is trying to drive to what is the core thing you're trying to solve,
Hmm.
and how does a solution improve your company's EBITDA?
Hmm.
Because if we can't draw a line between solving this and the company making more money, why are we doing it?
Hmm.
Because there's not going to be an ROI for it.
Hmm.
But once we draw the line and say, okay, solving this will open up an extra 10% on, we'll convert 10% more of our sales.
Hmm.
And that's going to grow our revenue 15% because we
Hmm.
think we're going to, that'll increase our revenue 15%.
Hmm.
Well, now we can trace that back to, oh, solving that over 3 years will make the company an extra $2 million, $3 million over 3 years. Well, now we have a 36-month ROI number.
Hmm.
Whatever we spend, we know we're going to solve this. We believe we're going to make $3 million more over 36 months.
Hmm.
So then you start evaluating what is the the price for doing that
Hmm.
related to, well, we know the value is $3 million over 3 years.
Hmm.
Um, and having those conversations drives deeper into, now we're not talking about what the software needs to do.
Hmm.
And, I need a page that lets me edit this. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do we support, for example, here, a sales team
Hmm.
in being able to close 10% more.
Hmm.
Um, and what is standing in their way? Maybe it takes too long to get pricing, and the client, in a prospective client, moves on to somebody else.
Hmm.
Well, if we can solve taking too long to get pricing, that's the thing that we're valuing.
Hmm.
It's not the value of the software; it's the value of the solution it brings.
And I was going to say, this right here is why I think I'm really excited about what you guys are doing in pursuing value pricing, because this is in contrast to what I think a lot of dev shops get wrong in the transition to value pricing. They think that value pricing is essentially cost plus pricing, where they
Mm-hmm.
think, what does it cost me to do this, right? Because we know how much
Yep.
the hourly rate is for the developer or whatever. We can extrapolate that out. And so what they do is, what they're getting to is a cost plus. They take whatever the cost is, they try to assume a 50% margin, and then that's what the price is. But
Mm-hmm.
I love that you're talking about this, where you're saying, first, let's focus on the value proposition to the business and get our hands around that to then determine, okay, this is total value that they're receiving. From there, there's a subset that we can say would be essentially the price that we're going to be charging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reality of it is that when we have a client come to us and say, "Hey, we want to do something," that client contact, I would say 70% of the time, is not the final decision maker.
Mm.
They have to run this up the chain from them.
Hmm.
And one of the most challenging conversations to have is, hey, can we spend some money? But if that conversation, if through our conversation with our client contact, we can help lay out that, oh, hey, and if we solve this, here's $3 million of money that we're going to make. It is so much easier for them to take a justified ROI
Hmm.
and an actual story of, this is how solving this increases the company's EBITDA,
Hmm.
to their boss or to their grand boss. That is a completely different conversation, and it lets them get the project sold internally
Hmm.
so much easier
Hmm.
that in the end of the day, they want the project because they want their life to be easier.
Right.
Um, and so that's the conversation that even the value brings to them, even in us walking through that.
Hmm.
Um, and honestly, it helps on the other side where there isn't a project.
Hmm.
Because if you sit down and you talk through it, and they're like, oh, we want to automate this because we spend a lot of time hand keying all of this information, and you go through and you talk through, well, what's the impact of it, and you realize that it might save the company individual salary over 3 years, and it's a low level salary, it's some hourly intern almost level.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, over 3 years, it's $150,000 it'll save, but it'll cost us $200,000 to build the project.
Mm-mm.
That's the point in which we say, hey, don't do this. This is a bad idea.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, this is one of the reasons, just from a business perspective, one of the reasons why I am such a fan of value pricing your projects, because what it does is it gets you and the client on the same page about, at the end of the day, we want to see your business thrive and grow and be more profitable. And we're not, out of our own conscience, we don't want to see you invest all this money into something that we can clearly see does not have an ROI.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, working with med tech, working with manufacturing companies as you guys have, you're probably dealing with larger enterprise level clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe where some of the challenge that some of the other devs that are going to be listening to this podcast are going to face is they're going to say, well, my clients aren't that big, so they don't have that much of a complex, matrix hierarchical decision making
Mm-hmm.
process in the buying of the software development. And I would say all the more reason why value pricing is going to be super important for them, because you are helping them go through greater rigor in their small business.
It really comes down to, and I think the impact is even greater if you are serving, and your point of contact is maybe the owner of that of your client, where your client is maybe a $3 to $5 million a year company,
Mm-hmm.
and $3 to $5 million a year, every dollar that they spend is important.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to spend the time to help justify this is what you should do. And frankly, a lot of times when people come, there'll be, well, I want this. Well, they're asking for a piece of software that addresses a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
It's putting the Band-Aid on the compound fracture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it might stop it bleeding right there, but um, but if you're always focused on understanding the core problem and where the value of solving it is, and you are able to then continue to ask those questions, you can help even that business owner drive to, oh, there's a bigger thing I can do that will solve all of this,
Mm-hmm.
not just the one thing that is the thorn in my side this week.
Yeah.
Um, and stepping back and looking at it, going, you know, what the clients are really paying for in value based is our expertise
Mm-hmm.
and how to best implement a solution to solve the problem, not just, yeah, we can write some code.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah, and I guess one, like, just practical question, because I'm hearing the voices in the back of my head of other dev shops that I've interviewed in the past is, okay, let's take that $3 million example, value
Mm-hmm.
price example, and let's say you guys come to $750,000 is the right price for that $3 million
Mm-hmm.
savings project.
Yep.
How, I guess, what are some safeguards you put in play on that $750,000 project so that you're not on the hook? Trying to think how best to explain it, because even at a $750,000 build, that's going to be like at least 12 months of development, if not more development. I would
Maybe.
imagine. Maybe.
Maybe.
Hmm.
Because remember, they're not paying for the software, they're paying for the solution.
Hmm.
So value based, one of the things that it does versus like a time and materials.
Mm-hmm.
A time and materials philosophy, not that anybody is being unethical, but from the consultant's point of view, we are incentivized to work as inefficiently as possible
Hmm. Yeah.
because we make more money the more hours we bill.
Mm-hmm.
So the fewer things that maybe we build internally in our own tooling to do the same things every time, it's better for us to build from scratch every time.
Hmm.
Where if our price is our price,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing a lot of the same kinds of things, we are our costs are still time based because salary is time based.
Mm-hmm.
The more efficient we can be, the faster we can deliver the solution to the client,
Mm.
and the more profitable that deal is.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, I'll take the example of, oh, there was a pricing thing that honestly pretty much every manufacturing company struggles with,
Mm-hmm.
and we know that for this client, over 36 months, we could add $1 million a year. So over 36 months is a $3 million value that we could bring to the company. If we have all of the components in place to work with, like we have all the libraries for their ERP and we have all of the libraries for their CRM, we have everything built, and all we got to do is connect a few things. It might be 2-3 weeks worth of effort for
Mm.
that $750,000. But at the same time, that we still brought the company a $3 million value for
Mm.
only $750,000. They're less than a 12-month ROI.
Mm. Mm.
And where the voices that I'm sure you're thinking about are like, yeah, but I didn't take that long.
Mm.
That's still connecting dollars to hours,
Mm.
not considering the value of the solution.
Yeah.
So it's more about the expertise and the value of the solution
Bingo.
than the number of hours it took.
That's so good.
Um, because if you really want to run it all the way back, how many hours of expertise have you developed over the years?
Yeah, that's good. Well, and Dave, you and I talked about this in our other call, but like I think some of the tangible examples you gave is like, you're probably not going to be value pricing something that's a brand new field, a brand new type
Nope.
of work. What you're really going to do is you're going to focus in on, hey, we've got many like different clients, experiences that we've already gotten
Mm-hmm.
to get us to this solution. And what we're going to do is we're going to maybe like white label it, whatever that is, but
Mm-hmm.
we're going to take that consistent solution and that's going to be the thing that we're going to be value pricing off of.
Yep. And it can be just the technology, or it can be solving the same kind of problem over and over.
Hmm.
Um, because the important aspect to it is contractually, when you're looking at that, we're not contractually laying out, we're going to build you software that has all of these functionalities. Contractually, I'm putting out there, we're going to build you software that will move the ball towards solving that problem.
Hmm.
Now, we can't guarantee we'll solve the problem because there's a whole lot outside of our expertise. I can't guarantee in that example that you're going to close 10% more because your salespeople might be terrible closers.
Sure.
I can't solve that with software.
Hmm.
Um, but I can take away some of the things that are hindering from a technology point of view,
Hmm.
um, which is the philosophy is that if I could guarantee somebody was going to make $3 million or $1 million extra a year,
Hmm.
a 36-month software ROI is a reasonable ROI for software.
Hmm.
So if I could guarantee it, the value of it would be $3 million, even if it took me 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Um, and while I would certainly like to make $3 million every 2 weeks, but that's the thought process of, because that's why we discount it off of that identified value of the solution. We
Yeah.
discount off of that because there is uncertainty.
Hmm.
But what we're focused on is documenting not the software we're going to build, but the solution we're going to solve, or
Hmm.
the problem we're going to solve, which kind of ties back into your question about agile versus waterfall,
Yeah.
because then it's our team deciding what the functionality needs to be. And
Hmm.
internally, we run the project as a traditional, almost internal development, if you want to think of it that way,
Hmm.
agile process.
Interesting. I,
Because
I I don't think I've ever heard of it that way, but I think that makes a lot of sense because it's like that's like the biggest rub is like, well, if we're going to do fixed bid, then basically what we're saying is we're going to fix the requirements to one very static thing from the very beginning, which just is a recipe for disaster. But I love how you're approaching that.
well, all software fundamentally, every software project, whether it's an agile project or not, is going to have a budgetary constraint
Mm-hmm.
that lives outside of build the coolest thing we want.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and without constraints, agile is just do the cool thing that seems like it's the neat thing that you have to tie it to where is the value in building the software? What is the ultimate problem we're trying to solve? And that's what we're trying to do is to break that connection between where the connection point being the functionality between us and the client, taking that away and moving it up the chain to it's the solution, it's what the business needs. Let us figure out what the software needs to do in order to solve the business. And then internally, we run it like I said, it's a project that it has a budget. We
Mm-hmm.
internally set a budget on how many weeks or how many sprints we want to put on against this. And we make decisions based on if a new idea emerges, if something comes up, we're like, oh, actually, that is a higher value.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put that in, or let's put that in an ice box for maybe a phase 2 for the client.
Mm.
So it actually still embraces all of the agile methodologies.
Mm.
I wouldn't want to do waterfall. The best waterfall project I was ever on. We took a 6-month, $500,000 project, delivered it 18 months late, and $1.5 million over budget. It's yeah,
Yeah, nope.
yeah,
I can't do that.
yeah. Um, but we're still able to stay focused on the agile methodologies
Mm.
because we're not trying to meet some functional thing where the client comes up with an idea. Now it's a change request and all of that.
Yep.
We're taking on hey, let us figure out what the software needs to do to solve your problem.
Oh, yeah. It's music to my ears. And I think I really do think that's how you implement value pricing in a software development context. So I've got many more questions that I wish I could ask, but we are way over time right now. So I want to be respectful of your time. So what I want to do is I want to just transition here. I love to give each of my guests an opportunity to give some words of wisdom. I want you to speak to, maybe it's a younger version of yourself, or maybe it's that, younger person in the industry. Two types of people that I really love for our guests on the show to share to would be, number one, maybe it's that really intelligent, capable developer, senior developer in corporate America right now, who's longing to go out and start their own thing. Or maybe it's somebody who within the last year has started their own dev agency or tech startup. What would be some advice that you would give that person just starting off?
Honestly, the very first thing that I would say is actually relates back to something we talked about before, which is have the emotional intelligence to understand that your ego isn't in play when it comes to delivering value to your clients. So in the meetings, be willing to ask the question you're a little like, I don't understand that. Yeah, that's fine. Just ask it. The client's not going to judge you for not knowing. And frankly, you might open a door for them by asking that they had never even considered in their business. When they have to then explain something, then their light goes on like, oh, actually, that's related to this over here, isn't it? Things that they don't see because they're working in it on a day-to-day basis. So keeping your ego out of any meeting with a client is probably number one. Because they're going to ask for dumb things because they don't know. They're not technologists. That's why you're in the room, is because you're the subject matter expert. So just as your doctor doesn't make fun of you for not knowing all of the health things, don't judge them for not knowing how software works or what software could or couldn't do.
Yeah, well, I love that. Be willing to ask the dumb questions. Be humble enough to do that, to be the one to broach those subjects. Because, like you've already shared in some of your examples, you never know what doors are going to be opened because you asked that really dumb question. So love that advice. Where, Dave, could people go to follow your story personally, or even the Refinery story? What are the best places to go?
Probably the best place is to find us on LinkedIn. I'm out there on LinkedIn, Dave Goerlich, and the Refinery does have a page. It's mostly, probably the majority of the content you'll see is on off of my personal, and we do kind of echo it over onto the Refinery stuff over there. And there is some blogging going on our website, not as much as I'd like, but we do get some good stuff out there as well. But LinkedIn is probably our core place.
Awesome. And Dave and I are connected on LinkedIn. So if you are connected with me, you can easily find Dave there. Dave, thank you so much for taking some time
Absolutely.
and sharing a little bit with us, with me. I mean, you got my wheels turning. So I very much appreciated our conversation. This has been great.
Awesome.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value out of our podcast today, please share it with your friends and subscribe for future episodes. Also, don't forget to leave us a review because it helps other people find us and hear inspiring stories like the one we heard today. If you are the founder of a software development agency, or you know somebody who is, and you'd like to share something exciting that you're up to with our audience, drop me a line at tony@equip.com. That's ACCQUIP.com.